Live from the BDN Studios, it's Bang and Dang.
That's awesome.
If you don't like that, then
You ain't black.
Welcome back to Battles of American Civil War, Behind the Battles, with Bang and Dang. Taking a look at another POW camp during the Civil War, this time a Union one. Camp Douglas in Chicago, which is sometimes called the North Andersonville. And if you guys listen to our Andersonville episode, you know how bad that is. Not quite the death rate that Andersonville had, but still pretty crazy there. A lot more history here, too. So, yeah. It was actually a camp to train soldiers at first and stuff. April 15th, 1861, the day after the Army garrison surrendered Fort Sumter to Confederate forces, Abe, he called 75,000 state militiamen into federal service for 90 days to put down the insurrection. It's going to take a little bit more longer than that.
he thought it would only take 90 days.
May 3rd, 1861, Lincoln called for 42,000 three-year volunteers, expansion of the regular army by 23,000 men, and of the U.S. Navy by 18,000 sailors. Convening in July 1861, Congress retroactively approved Lincoln's actions and authorized another 1 million three-year volunteers.
Well, the states and the localities had to organize and equip the volunteer regiments until later in 1861, when the old federal government became sufficiently organized to take over the project. Soon after President Lincoln's call for volunteers, many volunteers from Illinois gathered in various large public and private buildings in Chicago. And then they overflowed into camps on the prairie on the southeast edge of the city. Senator Stephen Douglas.
Back when Chicago had a prairie.
Right. Senator Stephen A. Douglas, he owned land next to this location, and he donated his land just south of the camps to the original University of Chicago.
Aren't you nice?
Good for him.
Oh, Henry Graves, he owned most of the property on which the camp was located. Illinois Governor Richard Yates assigned Judge Allen Fuller, who was soon to be Adjutant General for the state of Illinois, to select a site for a permanent Army camp at Chicago. Judge Fuller selected the site that was already in use for the makeshift camps because it was only 4 miles from downtown. Prairie surrounded the site. Nearby Lake Michigan could provide the water. And the Illinois Central Railroad ran within a few hundred yards of the site. Yeah, I mean, training them in there.
There you go, buds. Fuller, he was not an engineer. He did not even realize that the site was a poor choice for a large camp because of its wet, low-lying location, flooded constantly. The camp lacked sewers for more than a year. The prairie on which it was built on could not even absorb the waste from thousands and thousands of humans and horses. The camp flooded with each rainfall. In the winter, it was a sea of mud when the ground was not frozen. When the camp opened, only one water hydrant worked. There was a severe shortage of latrines and medical facilities from the time of the camp's initial use through the period of incarceration of the first group of rebel prisoners in mid-1862.
Gross.
Latrines, not lanterns.
Right. damn people couldn't see at nighttime. They needed lanterns for the latrines. The camp, it ran west 4 blocks from Cottage Grove Avenue to the present-day Martin Luther King Drive. Its northern boundary was what is now East 31st Street, and its southern boundary was the current East 33rd Place, which was then renamed College, it was then named College Place. A gate in the south fence of the camp provided access to the 10-acre property donated by Douglas to the old University of Chicago. That opened in 1857 at its site on Cottage Grove Avenue and 35th Street. A smallpox hospital, 4 rows of garrison barracks, and an Illinois Central Railroad station were located on the former Douglas property.
Fantastic.
Smallpox hospital, huh?
Yeah, you don't get those anywhere. The boundaries of the camp and the number, use, and location of its buildings evolved during the war. But certain main divisions of the camp existed for significant periods of time. Garrison Square contained officers' quarters, post headquarters, post office, and a parade ground. White Oak Square housed both the Union soldiers and prisoners until late 1863.
Oh, that's lovely.
All right. White Oak Square included the original camp prison and the building that would become infamous, White Oak Dungeon. Ooh.
And prisoners who were being punished were subject to close confinement in small, dark, dirty conditions in this dungeon. The dungeon was a room 18 square feet, lit by one closely barred window, about 18 by 8 inches off the floor.
Look, they had that.
With entry only through a hatch about 20-inch square in the ceiling. Oh, jeez. The room had a damp floor and an intolerable stench from a sink or a toilet in the corner of the room. Prison hospitals and a morgue were located just to the south of the camp in an area 10 acres known as Hospital Square. Convenient.
Okay, makes sense. I like it. 1863, the Army built Prison Square, or Prisoner's Square. Either way.
Let me guess.
They built that in the western division of the camp, as well as surgeons' quarters and some warehouses. Prison Square, which was located along the south and west sides of the Garrison Square, was created by combining parts of other squares with White Oak Square and separating the area from other parts of the camp with a fence. Prison Square eventually contained 64 barracks, which were 24 by 90 feet, with 20 feet partitioned off as a kitchen. Designed for about 95 men each, the camp's barracks held an average of 189 men when the prison population was its highest. Oh, shit, more than double.
Governor Yates put Colonel Joseph Tucker, commanding the 60th Regiment, Illinois State Militia, in charge of building the camp.
Okay.
Yates also appointed Tucker as the camp's first commander.
Makes sense.
State militia troops called the Mechanics Fusiliers, who were apprentice and journeyman carpenters, built the barracks in October and November of 1861. And these troops mutinied on December 18th, 1861, when the state of Illinois tried to press them into service as infantry upon completion of their work on Camp Douglas. They said, no, I don't think so, buddy.
Wow.
The state paid them less than they believed they were promised for their work.
Yeah.
Regular troops had to suppress the rioting construction troops and restore order to the camp. After the Mechanics Fusiliers repaired damage that they had caused to a fence, they were allowed to return home. They said, "Get the hell out of here."
Right.
Said, "Screw you guys. We're not even freaking soldiers."
15th of November, 1861. All the citizens that are not in the war, they're getting ready to go out opening day of whitetail season. I'm going to shoot them a buck.
Well, it's 1861. I don't think there was a hunting season. You just go out and shoot whatever the fuck you want.
That's true. Camp Douglas housed about 4,222 volunteer soldiers from 11 regiments. By February of 1862, the recruits suffered 42 deaths by disease. According to George Levy's 1999 History of the Camp, a total of 40,000 Union Army recruits passed through the camp for outfitting and training before the facility was permanently converted to a prisoner of war camp. Cool. In 1960, History by Eisendrath estimated the number of recruits as 25,000 based on his sources at the time. Colonel Tucker's his job as camp commander, it was not easy. He had to use increasingly hard measures to curb considerable drunkenness and disorderly conduct by recruits in the camp. He also had to supervise their conduct and sometimes take punitive action against them for the acts that they did in the city of Chicago. This is where the soldiers abuse past privileges.
Yeah, Chicago's wild, probably even back in 1865.
Oh, bad.
Or 61.
Yeah.
February 16th, 1862, the Union Army under Ulysses Grant, they captured Fort Donelson and Fort Henry. With these victories, his forces took about 12,000 to 15,000 Confederate prisoners. What do we do with them?
Right.
The Army was unprepared to handle this large group of prisoners and scrambled to find places to house them. Colonel Tucker, he told General Grant's superior, Major General Henry Halleck, that Camp Douglas could accommodate about 8 or 9 of those 8 or 9,000 of
He
those.
lied.
Right. Which is about the same number as the recruits that had been built for.
No.
This did not anticipate the differences required of a prison facility, though. Right. You guys, you got open barracks for recruitment guys to do whatever they want. Now you got to house prisoners that want to get out of there.
Yeah, not going to happen. General Halleck's chief of staff at the scene in Tennessee, Brigadier General George Cullum, he sent many prisoners to St. Louis before he received War Department instructions to direct 7,000 prisoners to Camp Douglas. He goes, send 7,000 of those bitches to Chicago. This would be a problem in Chicago because the camp and its staff could not easily handle even a smaller number of prisoners that it received, not let alone 7,000 more. But in an event, Illinois Central Railroad transported 4,459 of the Fort Donelson prisoners to Camp Douglas from Cairo, Illinois, where they had initially been sent.
February 18th, 1862, Colonel Arnold Voss, he took brief temporary command of the camp until Colonel Tucker returned from Springfield several days later. Awesome. Voss had to prepare for arrival on February 20th, 1862, of the first prisoners from Fort Donelson who found a camp but no real prison.
All right.
For the first few days, they were housed in the White Oak Square section, along with newly trained Union soldiers about to depart for service at the front. Oh, jeez. The Army sent sick prisoners to the camp, although it had no medical facilities at the time, and they've been advised not to even do it.
February 23rd, 1862, the Union troops vacated the camp, except for a small force left to guard the prisoners. This guard consisted of one regiment of 469 enlisted men and about 40 officers.
badly outnumbered.
Way outnumbered. February 25th, 1862.
I guess that'd be any prison.
Right. General Halleck ordered Confederate officers to be transferred to Camp Chase. This is in Ohio.
Officers.
Several hundred men were pulled out, and then Camp Douglas just became a prison camp for only enlisted men.
They're like Confederate officers. You get a little bit nicer
Right.
quarters, I guess.
And little more than a month by the end of March, over 700 prisoners dead.
Jeez.
About 77 escapes were recorded, and that was by June of 1862. Historians, they've said they've never even found any record of any escapee harming civilians.
Okay.
I don't think they ever want to harm the civilians. They just want to get the fuck.
They're not murderers and rapists. They're friggin' Confederate soldiers.
They just want to get below that Dixie line.
All right.
Like, this is weird up here. Some bitch.
February 26, 1862, Halleck, he ordered Colonel Tucker to report to Springfield. Colonel James Mulligan, a Union Army officer from Illinois, he was appointed as commander of the camp until June 14th.
Okay.
Between June 14th and June 19th, Colonel Daniel Cameron was in charge. First group of prisoners were treated reasonably well under the circumstances, despite the inadequacy of the grounds, barracks, and sewer and water systems.
All right.
Sewers weren't even authorized until June of 1863.
Wow.
And it took time after that to be completed.
Right.
Initially, the prisoners received enough to eat, with cooking stoves and utensils to aid in preparation and clothing. A good sutler store was set up as well.
Good for you guys.
It's a merchant who sells provisions. Oh, yeah, they got their own little provision store.
The Union Army sent 3 tons of cornmeal and also large quantities of blankets, clothing, shoes. They did that on the March of 1st, 1862. Sickness and death among the prisoners and even among some gods reached epidemic levels. Frozen hydrants led to a water shortage. 1 in 8 prisoners from Fort Donelson died of pneumonia or various diseases. After April 12, 1862, Colonel Mulligan, he finally permitted only physicians and ministers to visit the prisoners to reduce exposure to diseases.
Oh, the exposure's coming from inside the camp, buddy.
Right.
Well, Mulligan cooperated with local residents who provided a relief committee for the prisoners when they learned of the camp's poor conditions. Mulligan apparently showed some sympathy for the prisoners because he had been treated with respect by Confederate General Sterling Price when Mulligan's regiment had been captured and paroled at First Battle of Lexington.
See? That's nice.
Mulligan was exchanged in that after them captures October 30th, 1861. Good for you, buddy.
You only spent a little over a month. Good for you, bud. After the old Blue Coats' victory at the Battle of Shiloh and the capture of Island Number 10 in the spring of 1862, Camp Douglas housed 8,962 Confederate prisoners. Conditions at the camp deteriorated quickly. With the overcrowding and the escapes, they increased. Some escapes were aided by Southern sympathizers in Chicago, and others were facilitated by lax administration by Colonel Mulligan and the guards. They're like, man,
Whatever.
whatever, man, let them go.
To try to manage the great number of prisoners being captured during the war,
They allow, like,
the War Department of the Army set up the office of the Commissary General of Prisoners, and starting in June 1862, this position reported directly to the Secretary of War. August 1862, Lieutenant Colonel William Huffman, newly released from the Confederate POW camp, he took over that office and served it throughout the war, setting national policy related to treatment of prisoners, prison camps, and conditions for exchanging or releasing prisoners.
good for him. He got to see firsthand what it is to be a prisoner of war. He was like, I don't like that.
Right.
Wouldn't put that on anybody. Based on reports he received, Colonel Hoffman, he soon realized that Camp Douglas was inadequate for even a prison. He proposed construction of 2-story insulated barracks at the camp, but the Army approved maintenance or construction of only the thin single-story structures, which had been constructed for a short term by volunteer trainees. Oh, well. I'm like, nah, that's good enough, bud. 1862, Colonel Mulligan, Colonel Tucker, Colonel Hoffman, they all tried to get funds to improve the sewers, and they wanted to build new barracks. But no success. Quartermaster General Montgomery Meigs, he said construction of a new sewer system would be too extravagant. And it was not even until June of 1863 that he authorized the construction of sewers, after being pressured by leading members of the United States Sanitary Commission.
Like, this shit's gross, dude.
Right.
20th century historians have criticized local commanders and Hoffman for failing to secure a proper balanced diet for the prisoners.
What do you want me to do?
A better diet could have helped prevent the onset or spread of disease, including scurvy, which resulted from a known vitamin deficiency.
Right. Yeah, scurvy's rough, bud. Although still with the Illinois militia and not in the old Federal Army, Colonel Tucker, he returned to command He wanted to command that camp one more time on the 19th of June, 1862. To deal with local civilian sympathizers who might be aiding escapees, Colonel Tucker, he declared martial law on the 12th of July of 1862. 25 prisoners escaped on the 23rd of July.
He said, all right.
Tucker arrested several citizens who he believed aided the escapees. In addition, he brought in Chicago police to search the camp. This action caused much lasting animosity for the prisoners because the police confiscated many of the prisoners' valuables.
Yeah.
The police also confiscated 5 pistols and many bullets.
many bullets. Why do they have them?
And not use them on themselves. 20 of the escapees were recaptured within 2 weeks.
7 lucky sons of bitches.
They didn't know which way was north or south.
Right. They're like, damn.
Or they had like 1 foot bigger than the other, 1 leg longer than the other, so they just went in a big circle. Ended up back at the camp.
Dumb. In the summer of 1862, Henry Whitney Bellows, president of the United States Sanitary Commission, he wrote the following to Colonel Hoffman after visiting the camp. Sir, the amount of standing water, unpoliced grounds, of foul sinks, of unventilated and crowded barracks, of general disorder, of soil reeking miasmatic accretions, of rotten bones and emptying of camp kettles.
Oh, wow.
It's enough to drive a sanitarian to despair.
You ain't kidding.
Hope that no thought will be entertained of mending matters. The absolute abandonment of the spot seems to be the only judicious course.
Right.
I do not believe.
There's no cleaning that shit.
Yeah, you guys got to just tear it down. I do not believe that any amount of drainage would purge that soil loaded with accumulated filth, or those barracks fetid with 2 stories of vermin and animal exhalations. Nothing but fire can cleanse them.
You ain't kidding. I don't even want to burn that because that shit's toxic.
Yeah.
Wow. Hoffman, he already requested improvements in the camp, but he kept the report secret because he did not want to take a position contrary to that taken by any superior, such as Quartermaster General Meigs. Not only prisoners suffered, but one of Colonel Tucker's sons, who served with him at the camp, he became ill and died in the summer of 1862.
You got to go to somebody and be like, dude, now my freaking family's dying, bro.
Well, conditions did improve at the camp in the summer, as almost all prisoners left by September 1862.
Yeah, that would do it.
About 1,000 prisoners took an oath of allegiance to the United States and were freed. I mean, that's all you had to do from the beginning. Let me out, baby.
Right. All prisoners who were too ill or not too ill to travel were exchanged to the implementation of the July 22nd, 1862 Dix Hill prisoner cartel between the Union and Confederate armies. October 6, 1862, the few remaining prisoners who had been too ill to leave earlier, they were also gone.
Oh.
Through September 1862, 980 Confederate prisoners, 240 Union Army trainees, and guards had died at the camp, almost all of them from disease. Preventable.
Yeah, very, very. That's a large number, only at 9,000 people. It's like what?
A percent?
Right. So,
10% almost?
Maybe, yeah. Wow. In the fall of 1862, Camp Douglas again briefly became a training camp for Union Army. I want to go back there. For the Union Army volunteers. The old blue coats then used the camp for its most unusual purpose. Union soldiers who were paroled after their capture by Confederate Lieutenant General Thomas Stonewall Jackson at the Battle of Harper's Ferry on September 15, 1862, they were sent to Camp Douglas for temporary detention. Under the terms of the prisoner cartel, they had to await formal exchange before they could even leave the camp.
Right, this isn't formal yet.
Right.
And these 8,000 paroled Union soldiers began to arrive at Camp Douglas September 28, 1862. Brigadier General Daniel Tyler, he relieved Colonel Tucker of command at the camp. Under his command, these Union soldiers had to live under similar conditions to those endured by the Confederate prisoners.
Wow.
The conditions were worse because the camp had already become filthy and even more rundown during its occupancy by the prisoners.
Right.
So now, yeah, dude, that's fucked up.
Right, that's crazy. The paroled soldiers were fortunate to have only about a 2-month stay. They're able to tolerate the conditions somewhat better than the previous Confederate prisoners because the Union parolees were more warmly dressed and in better physical condition.
And probably could do whatever they wanted.
Right. The damp conditions and bad food still took their toll. By November, 40 soldiers of the 126th New York Volunteer Infantry dead, and about another 60 ill with fevers.
That's crazy.
That's insane.
Under these oppressive conditions, Union Army parolees became mutinous. They set fires and made many attempted escapes. Like, we were fighting for you, and now look what you're doing to us.
That's bullshit.
October 23rd, 1862, General Tyler brought in regular U.S. troops to stop parolee riots.
Oh, they shouldn't even be there in the first place.
Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, he also ordered Tyler to relax his strict discipline, which helped calm the parolees. Yeah, why are you treating these guys like prisoners?
Right. They got captured by the South.
Most of the prisoner of war exchanges between the Union and Confederate armies under the cartel were completed by the end of November. All the parolees left that camp by the end of that month, except for Colonel Daniel Cameron and his 65th Illinois Volunteer Infantry Regiment. And they were held until April 19th, 1863, and put to work as guards. Oh, jeez. 35 men of this regiment also died because of disease.
Oh, wow. That's just stupidity. 20th of November, 1862, Colonel Daniel Cameron, who had been in a brief command of the camp earlier in the year, and he had been among the parolees as well. He again took command of the camp.
That's crazy.
All right. Wow. On the 6th of January, 1863, Union Army ordered Brigadier General Jacob Ammen to take command of the camp, as Confederate prisoners from the Battle of Stones River were being sent to the camp.
The camp. I went to the camp. About 1,500 poorly clothed and generally physically unfit Confederate prisoners arrived January 26, 1863. About 1,300 other prisoners arrived the next day, and about 1,500 more arrived January 30th.
Holy shit, instantly overcrowded.
Yeah. During January, a group of Lake Superior Chippewa chiefs were shown the camp en route to Washington, D.C. The ranking chief was Naw Nab. Naw Nab means foremost sitter.
Oh.
He lectured the rebels, saying, "You have been fighting to break up this government like the bloody Sioux." And he gave them a little bit more than that.
Oh, wow.
All right, look at him.
Damn. February 2nd, 1863, General Ammen reported that many prisoners...
Yeah, it is Groundhog's Day.
They were too sick to even endure conditions at the camp. Neither the Army nor the War Department made any immediate improvements to that camp. That very month, 387 prisoners dead. This was the highest mortality rate in any prison camp for any month during the war.
Crazy, even more than Andersonville.
Fucking nuts. Since the prisoners had just arrived at the camp during the previous few weeks, these prisoners likely are already in weakened and poor physical condition at the time.
I would assume.
Temperatures that month reportedly as negative 20 degrees.
Damn.
Oh.
Well, smallpox, other diseases were widespread among these prisoners.
Yeah, but...
By March of 1863, 19 prisoners and 19 guards had died from smallpox.
Oh, jeez.
It was also later spread to northern cities and into Virginia by several infected prisoners who traveled together with many other prisoners through several large cities by train and steamer to City Point, Virginia for exchange. Most of these prisoners were exchanged by April 3rd, 1863 under this later prisoner cartel exchange.
All right.
Yeah, they're just, spreading smallpox wherever we go.
Right.
Dude, I swear.
Crazy.
All right, by April 27th, 1863, the final death toll from this group of prisoners was 784.
That's sad.
Well, Levy, he suggests that more than 300 of these deaths must have been covered up at the time, which would have made 784 a significant undercount of prisoner deaths to date. By the time these early 1863 prisoners departed from the camp, sources suggest that between 1,400 and 1,700 prisoners likely died at Camp Douglas. But official records show that only 615 prisoner deaths to this day. The majority of the deaths at the camp had been caused by typhoid fever and pneumonia.
The prisoners arrived in a weakened condition, making them vulnerable to disease. At the camp, they suffered filthy conditions, inadequate sewer system, harshly cold weather, lack of sufficient heat and clothing. A few prisoners were wounded or murdered by guards who saw them step over the deadline near the boundaries of the camp, or even if they committed minor offenses. But such incidents occurred infrequently, sure. Despite these hardships, survivors from this group of prisoners who wrote about their experiences, they generally stated that they were treated humanely at Camp Douglas. General Ammen, he was ordered to Springfield to command the District of Illinois on the 13th of April, 1863. Colonel Cameron, he took command of the camp for a week.
All right.
Cool.
For about 2 weeks, Captain Phillips, John Phillips, he was a senior officer at the camp and in command. Between May 12th, 1863 and 18th of August, 1863, Captain J.S. Putnam was in charge of the almost empty camp, which then only held about 50 prisoners. They had free roam of everything. The Army made some improvements to the camp and planned others in the summer of 1863 because it intended to return the camp to its original purpose of housing and training new Union recruits. But Union victories during the summer of 1863, they produced a large number of prisoners. And where else are you going to send them but to Camp Douglas, as that was returned to use as a POW camp. From this time until the end of the war, said, we can't train nobody. We're going to have to house all these guys.
Jeez. The first of the new Confederate prisoners, 558 militant guerrilla raiders, who had been under the command of Brigadier General John Hunt Morgan.
Yeah.
They arrived at the camp on the 20th of August, 1863. Colonel Charles DeLand.
You know why they call it DeLand? Because it's right next to the sea.
He had been a prisoner of the Confederate earlier in the war and would be again, and who had commanded the 1st Michigan sharpshooters in pursuit of Morgan. He was ordered to take command of the camp on the 18th of August, 1860.
Damn, so he was a prisoner, took command of the prisoner camp, and then became another prisoner when he went back out into service. Well, Colonel DeLand was appointed commandant of the camp because he was the senior officer of the regiment guarding the prisoners as they were brought there. By September 26, 1863, a total of 4,234 Confederate prisoners were being held at the camp.
Jeez.
October 9th, that same year, Dr. A.M. Clark, medical director of prisoners, he inspected the camp. He found the number of prisoners had risen to 6,085, with only 978 Union soldiers in the garrison to guard them. Wow.
Well, Colonel DeLand, he tried to impose discipline on the disorderly camp, but was frustrated by its poor condition and corrupt guards, including especially those from his own regiment.
Oh, tried to piss him off even more.
Because only 2 water hydrants were available to the prisoners, they had to wait in the cold for hours to get water. Open sinks, sewers, they ran through the middle of the camp, just like the one the Confederates had.
Gross.
The rundown buildings provided inadequate shelter. Hospital capacity, with 120 beds for prisoners and 50 beds for guards, was seriously inadequate.
I would think so.
Wow.
Almost like you needed to turn a couple barracks into the hospital.
Good shit.
The post chapel was converted into hospital space, but there was still insufficient capacity for all the sick prisoners and guards. During this period, in retaliation for the treatment of Union prisoners by the Confederates, an undisclosed official in the high command ordered the cook stoves, which also provided heat. He ordered them replaced by 40 U.S. gallon boilers.
Oh, wow.
These large pots provided little heat for the buildings and destroyed the quality of food cooked in them.
Oh, jeez, what an asshole.
What a dick.
DeLand, he put infantry prisoners to work, building a new sewer system for the camp. Prisoners were not even required to work, but many volunteered, probably in part because they were paid in chewing tobacco and clothing.
Hell yeah.
He also had them begin construction on a more substantial stockade. After criticism from Dr. Clark and Colonel Hoffman, who reviewed reports on the camp in mid-October of 1863, DeLand provided the prisoners with cooking utensils, 100 barrels of lime, 24 whitewash brushes, and a quantity of lumber for repairs and washing of buildings.
Good for you, guy. October 25th, 1863, DeLand ordered that prisoners clean their quarters regularly, but overcrowding seems to have made it impossible to keep the barracks sanitary. And construction of the new sewers was finished by November 6th, but this new system had inadequate 3-inch pipes and ran along only 2 sides of the camp. Additional improvements at this time included laying of water pipes, laying that pipe, and near the completion of fences for the first time since the camp became a prisoner detention facility.
Oh, here we go. We got fences.
What were they doing before?
Right. Prisoners who tried to escape were placed in White Oak Dungeon, which was an 18-square-foot space under the guard room, which had only one small window, and was permitted with a intolerable stench. In his October 1863 inspection, Dr. Clark found 24 prisoners in this space, which he described as suitable for no more than 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm.
Morgan's men attempted many escapes because of the weak security force. 26 prisoners escaped from the dungeon on the 26th of October, 1863. More than 150 prisoners escaped during DeLand's period of command of the camp.
Damn, he wasn't watching nobody, huh?
I could let him go.
Well, President Lincoln's brother-in-law, Ninian Wirt Edwards, he was a Union Army captain. He contracted with vendors to supply meat and other rations to the military camps. Their subcontractors delivered poor quality rations directly to prisoners at Camp Douglas and not to the camp commissary. The garrison also received poor quality meat from these subcontractors. News of this developed into a scandal that carried over to the administration of the next camp commander. Like, yeah, dude, you're giving these guys like
sad
gizzlets and giblets or whatever, not even like real meat.
All right, it's sickening. DeLand was pressured to increase security, but he had several factors working against him. The layout of the camp, guards from the Invalid Corps who were unable to form efficiently, the quartering of prisoners and guards together at White Oak Square. Together with the ease of which money could be sent or brought to prisoners, these factors contributed to corruption and bribery, as it always does. There was one occasion specifically where DeLand lined up the prisoners from the 8th Kentucky Cavalry Regiment when a tunnel was found under the barracks, and he ordered guards to shoot if any sat down.
Oh, damn.
Oh, damn.
Well, one prisoner was killed and 2 were wounded by the guards before the lineup was concluded. Finally, 15 to 20 men confessed to being the main diggers, and they were sent to White Oak Dungeon. Later, DeLand hanged 3 men by their thumbs, so they partly had to tiptoe for an hour, allegedly because they threatened an informer. Jeez. One of these men fainted and another threw up on himself. DeLand imposed the same punishment at least one more time after this.
Oh, son of a bitch.
Hanging them up by their thumbs, so they're... That's crazy.
Wow. He also ordered men out of the barracks for long periods of time while searches for tunnels were conducted. He ordered that cook stoves be extinguished when taps was played at sunset, which was a hardship during cold weather. Yeah, come on now. Despite these measures, about 100 of Morgan's men, they escaped through a tunnel on 3rd of December, 1863. Most were recaptured. DeLand ordered guards to shout only one challenge to prisoners who came too near the fence or outside of barracks at night before firing if they did not obey. Just once.
Just stop once, and if they don't, shoot them.
Confederate prisoner T.D. Henry, he suggested that most shooting incidents at Camp Douglas occurred during DeLand's term as commandant.
He sounds like a dick.
To discourage escape attempts, prisoners who went to use lanterns at night had to leave their clothes in the barracks regardless of the weather. Ooh.
Jeez.
Yeah, fuck you.
November 9th, 1863, Colonel Benjamin Sweet, who was commander of the 8th Regiment of the Invalid Corps, guarded the camp. He challenged Colonel DeLand's command of the camp because Sweet's commission arguably predated DeLand's. He's like, I should be.
Right.
A few days later, DeLand reacted quickly to prevent escapes when a fire destroyed 300 feet of barracks, fences, and the sutler shop on November 11th. This worked in his favor, as Colonel Hoffman ordered that Colonel DeLand remained as commander, as if we can't do it now. Hoffman then ordered DeLand to cut rations at this time, which increased the hardships of the prisoners, although they still seemed to have a sufficient quantity of food daily, supposedly.
Very good. Well, because of that fire, Hoffman decided to go to Chicago to inspect the camp himself. He arrived on 15th November, 1863. DeLand, he bribed prisoners with whiskey to clean up the camp for Hoffman's visit.
Okay, Newsom.
All right. On 18th of November, 1863, Brigadier General William Orme, who reported directly to Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, he showed up to inspect the camp in preparation for Orme taking over command. He noted that the garrison of 876 men was dangerously small and that 61 men had escaped in the preceding 3 months. Chicago doctors who inspected the prison in 1863, he called Camp Davis an extermination camp, quickly became the largest Confederate burial ground outside of the South.
That's crazy.
Damn.
The Army ordered sutler stores at prison camps shut down on December 1st, 1863. That was in retaliation for reported Confederate mistreatment of Union prisoners. The store at Camp Douglas, that was indeed closed, but on December 12th. So after a successful tunneling escape December 3rd, Colonel DeLand ordered all floors torn out of the barracks to be replaced by dirt, even with the floor joist.
Oh.
Right. That's crazy. This resulted in conditions that increased sickness and mortality.
Of course.
And the garrison also tore out partitions in the barracks.
Son of a bitch.
Dude, come on, guys.
Wow. DeLand also confiscated warm coats, possibly to prevent escapes, but as likely in retaliation for past escapes and attempts. On the 17th of December, the prison camp officials closed the barbershop and newsstand and stopped sales of stamps, envelopes, and writing paper. This is also likely in retaliation for the escapes.
Wow.
When Sergeant Major Oscar Cleat of the 55th Georgia Infantry reported to DeLand that his men rejected an offer of amnesty if they joined the Union Navy because they could not swim, DeLand had him placed in the dungeon for 21 days. Wow. This guy's a piece of shit.
Yeah.
Despite these harsh actions, DeLand also worked to free 50 underage prisoners who he discovered were between the ages of 14 and 17. The Army did not free them.
Okay. On December 23rd of the same year, Brigadier General William Orme, he finally relieved DeLand as commander of the camp. And but DeLand, he remained at the camp until March 11th as commander of the garrison.
Oh, jeez.
Orme had arranged to increase the garrison, about 400 reinforcements for the guards from the 15th Regiment of the Invalid Corps under Colonel James Strong. They arrived the next day.
Okay.
March 18th, 1864, in an effort to improve morale, the Union Army renamed the Invalid Corps as the Veteran Reserve Corps.
Oh,
you guys are
cool.
no longer invalid.
Right. Awesome. Well, General Orme, he tried to handle the continuing scandal over the poor quality beef, as well as other administrative problems that he inherited. After investigation, he exonerated Ninian Edwards and his vendors, and he placed the blame for the meat problem solely on subcontractors.
I bet he did. I'm sure had Sure, Lincoln had nothing to do with that.
Right. Despite Edwards' exoneration and his relationship with the old president, the Army took control of the subsistence at the camp away from Edwards on the 27th of January, 1864. Edwards, which was a captain in the Union Army, he was reassigned as food commissary and treasurer of the prison fund in March of 1864. I don't think it should have anything to do with the prison.
Right. Well, a blizzard and temperature of negative 18 degrees Fahrenheit occurred January 1st, 1864.
Chicago, too, is constantly windy. Fuck.
Windy City. Some prisoners who escaped at this time were found frozen to death nearby.
Makes sense.
January 8th, General Orm instituted a program of armed guard patrols. Some prisoners reported killing and eating rats after a prison kitchen was demolished January 10th, and food shortages resulted, but the reports appear to be dubious. General Orm, he obtained some Union Army overcoats outside of channels and distributed them to prisoners. But when Colonel Hoffman learned of his actions, he reprimanded him for proceeding outside of regulations.
Get the hell out of here. Come on.
Idiots.
Jeez.
Are these guys still not Americans? Like, holy crap.
Wow. Dr. Edward Kiddo of the Surgeon General's office, he inspected the camp on the 18th of January. He found the severely overcrowded barracks deep in filth and mud, swarming with vermin due to the lack of flooring. Cooking was deficient, garbage littered with the streets. Old latrines were not sealed properly, and waste was seeping to the surface.
Ugh.
He gave high remarks to the hospital, but noted that 256 men remained in barracks because the hospital's 234 beds were full. Jeez.
He also found that 36% of the prisoners were ill. 57 prisoners had died just in December of 1863.
Jeez.
The guards also were suffering from the poor conditions at the camp, with 29% ill and 6 deaths among them in December.
Wow.
The doctor concluded the camp was unfit for use, but as we know, it remained in use.
Of course it did.
They're not like, what do we want to? What are we supposed to do, guys?
Right.
Hey, how about put the floors back and call a plumber to get this fucking toilets fucking snaked out or something? Jeez.
Something shit. 20th of January, prisoners began to be transferred from White Oak Square to Prisoner Square. The construction added 40 acres to the camp. The barracks had to be moved on rollers. When unpaid prisoners refused to do further work on the move, they were forced to use makeshift shelters rather than being allowed to sleep in the partially moved buildings.
Hey, they said your buildings you're sleeping in, I guess.
All the prisoners were not moved from White Oak Square until April of 1864. Jeez, old Pete.
Well, thanks to another inspection of the camp by Dr. Clark, February 4th, 1864, the flooring was finally restored. Clark, he also found that the number of working hydrants for supplying water to the camp had been increased from 3 to 12.
Hey, that's nice.
By February 27th, floors were laid in all barracks, and the structures were raised 5 feet off the ground on thick timber legs. Nice. Cool. This not only improved the sanitary condition of the barracks, but helped prevent tunneling.
Yeah.
That's probably, During the move, many of the barracks and kitchens had been placed closer to the fences, which found to encourage tunneling efforts. Right. Why would you move them to the fence? Upon the discovery of these escape efforts, prison officials moved the barracks further from the stockade walls, and it reduced the attempts to escape.
Clearly.
By tunnels.
Makes sense. It was 11th of March.
Sounds like a bunch of idiots running this camp, first of all.
A bunch of them, constant. 11th of March, Colonel DeLand and his regiment were sent to the front.
You go to the front of the battle lines.
DeLand was wounded 4 times in the battles of the Wilderness, Spotsylvania, and Petersburg. He was taken prisoner by the Confederates, but was not mistreated despite his command of Camp Douglas.
He's a colonel.
His Confederate captors treated his wounds. He was also exchanged and discharged from the Army on the 4th of February, 1865. On the 13th of March, 1867, Congress confirmed the award to DeLand of the honorary grade of Brevet Brigadier General to rank from March 13th, 1865. Why?
Wow.
Bitch.
The War Department appointed Colonel James Strong as the new head of the garrison. His command began during General Orm's command of the camp and continued through Colonel Sweet's command. At the beginning of his duty, Strong had only about 650 healthy men to guard almost 6,000 prisoners. Strong prepared new prison rolls and found that 84 prisoners were missing. He was the first garrison commander to force prisoners to work, but work details were restricted to 4 hours per day. Oh, okay.
Between January and March of 1864, when Colonel Strong had only 550 men available for guards, 32 escapes were made from the camp. Strong realized placement of the buildings in Prisoner Square contributed to the problem, and he had them moved away from the fences and closer to the middle of the square. The fence separating Prisoner Square from the rest of the camp was completed on the 22nd of March. About this time, General Orm attached many bright oil-burning lamps to the fence to illuminate the area at night.
That's a fire hazard.
Yeah.
Also, a new sutler store with high prices, though, that was established at the camp around April 1st. Construction of a very advanced additional 180-bed hospital included a mess room, kitchen, hot water, adjoining laundry, and flush toilets. Oh, flush toilets.
Nice.
That was completed April 10th of 1864. Yet the hospital facilities were still too small for all the needs of the prisoners and guards. Despite the need, the camp added only 70 more beds in 2 old buildings. Jeez. You guys got like hundreds of acres. Build a freaking 1,000-room or a bed hospital. Holy crap.
All right. Well, the separate smallpox hospital remained in a converted cavalry stable until it was moved to a site called Adele Grove. It was about about a half a mile south of the camp on the south side of the University of Chicago. This faced Cottage Grove.
So the University of Chicago is between a messed up, shit-infested camp and then a smallpox-infested hospital? Jeez.
The expanded facility began to operate on 15th April, 1864. Strict discipline and abuse of the prisoners increased at this time. Colonel Strong gave more power to patrols and put each barracks under control of a sergeant, 2 corporals, and 5 privates.
Oh, geez, like their own little regiment. Some of these individuals were vindictive and even dangerous. April 10th, 1864, guards made some prisoners stand on barrels for purchasing whiskey from a guard. What'd they do to the guard?
Right.
Others were made to wear signs noting various offenses. A new dungeon, this time about 20 feet square and 7 feet high with 2 small air holes that was built in Prisoner Square. 3 men spent a night there for climbing a roof to watch horse racing. Punishment through extensive use of ball and chain, using a 32-pound cannonball chained to a prisoner's leg began.
Oh, yeah.
Some prisoners received this punishment for reneging on a request to take the oath of allegiance to the United States. They said, I swear I will, but then they caught him again, and they're like, you son of a bitch.
17th of March, 1864. The War Department ordered that any shooting incident at a prison camp must be investigated by a board of officers. Thereafter, only 8 shooting incidents were reported. 6 in connection with escape attempts, 1 for urinating in the street, and 1 for crossing the deadline. 2 prisoners in the barracks were wounded when the shots missed the prisoner who crossed the deadline. On April 16th, 1864, Lieutenant Colonel John F. Marsh of the Inspector General's office inspected the camp. What did he find?
He found a lax control of sutlers, prisoners being paid tobacco for garbage collection by a private garbage contractor, barracks in poor condition with floors ripped up, filthy bedding, grounds wet, and poor policing. Jeez. April 17th, 1864, Ulysses S. Grant canceled all prisoner exchange negotiations and said they would not resume unless they included black prisoners held by Confederates. This led to a several months-long impasse in prisoner exchanges until shortly after negotiations were resumed, January 21st, 1865. So guess what? Nobody's leaving now.
Both Union and Rebel armies had to house many additional prisoners for longer periods of time than they had in the past. When the prisoner cartel had been operating, many prisoners they could expect to be exchanged within a few months. 27th of April, 1864, without authority, General Orm, he fired Colonel Strong as commander of the garrison and installed Colonel Benjamin Sweet. 2 days later, when Orm was ordered to correct the problems at the camp, he resigned. He was also reported to be ill at the time. He was like, fuck this shit, I'm done.
I'm going home. May 2nd, 1864, the War Department appointed Colonel Sweet as commander of the camp. He had been at the camp for 7 months and wanted the post. He was like, I'd get a little bit better food at least or something. Right. Some historians now doubt his claim to have been wounded at the Battle of Perryville because he claimed that the 2 wounds, including a chest wound, were treated by ordinary soldiers and not doctors. On the other hand, other sources say that his right arm was rendered useless by the wounds, and in any event, Sweet transferred to the Invalid Corps.
Okay.
What the hell did that have to do with anything?
Right. Well, Sweet, he proved to be a strict disciplinarian.
Are they all?
Who increased punishments and cut rations. This latter action was in line with revised War Department policy in 1864. He proved to be a better organized in most respects, and he was a better administrator than his predecessors. Colonel Sweet reinstated Colonel Strong as commander of the garrison. Sweet, he strained relations with Colonel Hoffman in the national office by refusing to live at the camp and by moving his office to downtown Chicago.
He's like, I'm not living in this fucking cesspit.
Wow. His 12-year-old daughter, Ada, was living with him, apparently to act as his secretary. Or his daughter.
Right. Confederate prisoner T.D. Henry, he noted that Sweet appointed a fiend named Captain Webb, Spawnable, as inspector of prisoners. From this time forward, the darkest leaf in the legends of tyranny could not possibly contain a greater number of punishments.
Oh, wow.
Spawnable's patrol force of 2 lieutenants, 10 sergeants, 20 corporals, and 38 privates continued to regulate rations, cooking arrangements, and work details. A 5-man squad was on constant patrol in Prisoner Square, and as Sweet was not on site, prisoners felt the garrison soldiers would not be held accountable for their treatment, right?
Right, jeez.
For some prisoners, the patrol were a benefit because they protected prisoners from each other, right?
Right.
The patrols cracked down on a few guards whose actions were out of line as well. Look at that.
Sweet, he changed the rations by eliminating hominy, which he said was a waste, and candles as well, which he believed were used in aid of tunneling. Using forced labor to build new units, he placed an increasing number of prisoners' barracks on parallel streets. Sweet had the prisoners search daily for contraband to be sure prisoners had no cash to bribe guards. But such hidden money was not found.
I would assume.
During a prison-wide roll call on the 24th of May, the guards confiscated excess clothing from the prisoners' barracks.
The topsoil of the camp had become so eroded that guards had to wear goggles as protection against blowing sand and dust. And prisoners had to almost close their eyes to move around. Oh, jeez. May 27th, 1864, Sweet ordered 2 more sinks built in Prisoner Square. They're calling sinks their toilets. I don't know what. He had more than 6,000 feet of pine board delivered for repairs to the barracks as well. He also tried to force prisoners to keep the camp in repair. Prisoners attacked the fence in an attempt to escape June 1st, but were thwarted, mainly by guards on the ground using revolvers.
Yeah.
Those on the fence lines were armed with rifles that might not have worked. No prisoners were killed in the incident. They said, "We got them."
Right. Wow.
Can't shoot them, though.
As the number of prisoners at the camp increased in the summer of 1864, the War Department again reduced rations. This was in retaliation for the old rebels reducing rations and for Union prisoners.
Hey, tariffs, baby.
Right. Rations reportedly no longer lasted quite as long as the period for which they were allotted.
That would probably make sense. That's what happens when you decrease things.
A few prisoners reported that prisoners resorted to eating rats.
Hey, you gotta do what you gotta do.
Guards punished anyone caught taking bones from the garbage by tying the bone in the prisoner's mouth and making him crawl around like a dog.
That's crazy.
As the length of the confinements increased due to the lack of prisoner exchanges, more fights between prisoners arose. Other prisoners usually broke them up before guards intervened, and work details were still required.
Of course they were. By June of 1864, guards had set up the mule, or wooden horse, which was a sawhorse type device about 4 feet off the ground, later raised to 15 feet. It had a thin, almost sharp edge, and was used as punishment. Prisoners were forced to sit on it. Prisoners used their hand to brace themselves when on the device, but a Confederate prisoner reported seeing men forced to sit on it until they fainted and fell off.
Oh, jeez.
Sometimes weights were tied to the prisoner's feet.
Ah.
The device, which was outside, was used in any type of weather, obviously. A guard was also required to sit on the device as punishment for an unrecorded offense as well.
Yeah, cool. At least everybody's getting the same.
In line with War Department instructions, the post surgeon refused Confederate surgeons' request to send medicine for free to the prisoners. Now, these Confederates are like, we'll give them, nope, sorry, guys.
No. Camp Douglas conspiracy, thought to have been a serious plot to assault the camp and free the prisoners. This was supposed to have come to fruition on the 8th of November, 1864. Historians still do not agree on whether the plot was real or a hoax, or it was devised by people seeking advantage from misinformation. Attorney and historian George Levy, he maintained that the conspiracy began as a con aimed at Confederate agents that evolved into a hoax exploited by Colonel Sweet for his own advantage.
All right, so what happened? Levy wrote that believing in the Camp Douglas conspiracy was a matter of faith. Confederate agents thought they had created a workable plot, and Colonel Sweet made their dream come true.
Oh, right.
On the other hand, Kelly wrote that Sweet seemed to believe the plot to be real.
Okay.
Eisendrath also treated the plot as real. Writing at a time closer to the event, Bross also describes the plot as real. Don't know who any of those guys are, but okay.
In the spring of 1864, the rebel government it sent agents to Canada to plan prison escape attempts and attacks in the North. One of the agents, Captain Thomas Hines, he believed that he could raise a force of about 5,000 Confederate sympathizers in Chicago to free the prisoners. On the other hand, no evidence of the elementary planning of the details for the assault before Hines began to plan the operation. In mid-August of 1864, they had not even been found, no plans whatsoever. He soon found that he had only had 25 untrained volunteers for the difficult mission.
Like, are you stupid?
Right.
He apparently gave up on the scheme as the Democratic Convention in Chicago, which was supposed to provide volunteers and cover for the execution of the plan. It ended at the end of August. Sweet kept the tale alive, however, and told superiors he was about to crush a dangerous uprising.
Oh.
As Sweet made no effort to prevent the 196th Pennsylvania Infantry from leaving the camp 11 days earlier, Levy thinks that his report to superiors was self-serving.
It was.
Why didn't he prevent them?
Right. Wow. 6th of November, 1864, Brigadier General John Cook in Springfield, Illinois, he authorized Colonel Sweet to arrest 2 Confederate agents at Chicago. Sweet, he sent a message by hand delivery, not by telegraph. He sent it to Cook that said that Colonel Marmaduke of the rebel army and other officers were in town plotting to release the prisoners. Sweet claimed that he had to act immediately and arrest 2 or 3 prominent citizens who were actively involved in the plot.
Well, without a warrant, Sweet's men searched the home of Charles Walsh, who was the leader of the Sons of Liberty. Motorcycle group name. They were sympathetic with the South and discovered a cache of guns and ammo.
Uh-oh.
The arms were not found in the quantity needed to arm 2,000 men, as the plot supposedly called for, though. Sweet effectively extended martial law from the few blocks surrounding the camp to the entire city of Chicago.
Oh.
Sweet stated that 106 men were arrested, including Walsh and Judge Buckner Stith Morris of the Circuit Court of Illinois, who was treasurer of the Sons.
Oh.
Jeez, what is this? Burnside?
Right.
He was in this area at this time, wasn't he?
Oh, sure. Somewhere over half of those arrested were promptly released. Another search on the 11th of November turned up 78 more guns. Only 6 of the 18 Camp Douglas prisoners from Chicago were arrested on November 6th, while the others were arrested between the 12th and 16th. Sweet found only 51 of the 69 Chicagoans on his list of 108 suspects on November 6th. The other Chicagoans were seized later, and the other suspects were arrested outside Chicago in their home countries.
Or counties.
Yep.
Sweet's claimed to have arrested leaders of the Klingman Gang of Southern Illinois, draft resistors, and the Southern sympathizers is not borne out by the records, though.
Okay.
Sweet combined those he arrested in a church before moving them to Camp Douglas. The Secretary of War Stanton approved of Sweet's action. Generals Hooker and Cook sent him reinforcements, and Governor Yates put the Chicago militia at Sweet's disposal.
Ooh.
Sweet, he then had about 2,000 troops available. He then arrested 5 more members of the Sons of Liberty November 14th, and this included Richard T. Semmes. He was not the brother of the Confederate admiral, as Sweet asserted at the time, though. Oh. Raphael Semmes.
Okay.
Some people have the same last name, man.
Yep. He also arrested Vincent Marmaduke, who was not the Confederate colonel, according to Levy. After the release of a number of suspects, the total number of leaders and foot soldiers in the alleged plot to assault the camp and free the prisoners was just 66 men.
All right.
The Army agreed with Sweet's advice to try those arrested before a military commission, but ordered that this trial take place in Cincinnati and not in Chicago. Sweet did not arrest Mary Morris, the young pro-Southern wife of Judge Morris, but the prosecutor, Major Henry Burnett, ordered her arrested.
Oh.
She was not charged, likely as part of a deal in return for her testimony. Her later self-incrimination led to the exoneration of her husband. Oh,
shit. Sweet's main informer and agent, John Shanks, a Confederate prisoner who was a former Morgan's raider and a convicted criminal, he testified against the defendants. Sweet kept a pretense that Shanks was not his agent and lied that Judge Morris had aided Shanks to escape from Camp Douglas. In a recently discovered letter of March 29, 1865, from Sweet to Hoffman, Sweet, he told Hoffman of using Shanks and asked for approval of 1 year's pay from the prison fund for him.
Okay.
No record of a reply from Hoffman has been found. This Sweet's guy, huh?
Shanks' criminal past was disclosed to the military commission, but it still convicted many of the defendants. On the 12th of December, President Lincoln awarded Sweet the rank of Brevet Brigadier General, United States Volunteers, from December 20th, 1864. And the United States Senate confirmed the award on February 14th, 1865. Jeez. Shanks, he was recruited as a galvanized Yankee in 1865. As a captain commanding Company I of the 6th U.S. Volunteer Infantry, he was the only former Confederate prisoner commissioned as an officer.
That's great.
Wow.
Former Confederate prisoners of war swore allegiance to the United States and then joined the Union Army.
Oh, wow.
About 5,600 of them.
Yeah. That's
cool. Of those, more than 250 had begun their service as Union soldiers, were captured in battle, then enlisted in prison to join a regiment of the Confederate States Army.
They ain't give a fuck.
They were then surrendered to Union in 1864, were held as deserters, but were saved from prosecution by being enlisted in the 5th and 6th U.S. Volunteers. So they went from Union to Confederacy, back to Union.
Wow.
Jeez.
That's crazy.
The first use recorded in the Oxford English Dictionary of the phrase "to hell in a handbasket" was in the Great Northwestern Conspiracy in all its startling details, which is an 1865 account by I. Winslow Ayer of events surrounding the Camp Douglas conspiracy.
Mm-hmm.
Ayer alleges that at an August meeting of the Order of the Sons of Liberty, Judge Morris, he said, "Thousands of our best men were prisoners in Camp Douglas, and if once at liberty would send abolitionists to hell in a handbasket."
Oh! Wow. Toward the end of 1864, surgeons refused to even send recovering prisoners back to the barracks due to the rampant scurvy attributable to Hoffman's policy of withholding vegetables from the prisoners. In October of 1864, 984 of 7,402 prisoners reported as sick. Meanwhile, in November of 1864, as repairs were being carried out, water was cut off to the camp and even to the hospital. Prisoners had to risk being shot in order to gather snow, even beyond the deadline for coffee and other uses.
Wow.
Assholes.
December 5th, 1864, prisoners from Confederate General John Bell Hood's army, which had been shattered at the Battle of Franklin and Nashville, they began to arrive at Camp Douglas. These weak and destitute prisoners were made to undress and stand outside for a long period of time in ice and snow, while guards robbed them of any valuables.
Jeez.
One of these prisoners, John Copley, he stated that rations were sufficient to keep the men tolerably hungry, though. Just a little rumble in the tummy.
Right. By this time, the new 6-inch water pipes kept latrines running smoothly.
Good for them, finally, huh?
With bath and laundry facilities now available, prisoners themselves enforced clothes washing and bathing if other prisoners were reluctant to do so.
Yeah, you get your stank ass over there and wash your ass, man.
Although censored, mail was sent and delivered faithfully, even to and from prisoners in the dungeon. Little, if any, evidence backs up a few later assertions that prisoners often froze to death. Although some 6 prisoners who should have been in a hospital probably did die because of the cold. Near the end of the March of 1865, a sewer pipe broke, and with the incentive of 42 barrels of whiskey, prisoners were put to work.
Oh, yeah. The camp officials contracted with an unscrupulous undertaker, C.H. Jordan, who sold some of the bodies of Confederate prisoners to medical schools and had the rest buried in shallow graves without coffins. Some bodies reportedly were even dumped into Lake Michigan, only to wash up on its shores.
Jeez.
Levy states that bodies may have ended up in the lake because they were initially buried in shallow graves along the shore
Could be possible.
and then exposed due to erosion. They just drifted away.
Right.
Jordan shipped 143 bodies to Kentucky, according to the official records, and claimed to have sent about 400 bodies to the families of the deceased during the course of the war.
Wow, many dead prisoners' bodies initially were buried in unmarked paupers in Chicago City Cemetery, which is located on the site of today's Lincoln Park. Oh, jeez. In 1867, the bodies were reinterred as to what is now known as Confederate Mound in Oakwood Cemetery, which is about 5 miles south of former Camp Douglas.
Well, with the surrender of Lee's army, April 9th, 1865, enough former Confederate prisoners volunteered to enlist in the U.S. Army to join in the frontier Indian warfare to fill 10 companies.
Damn.
Despite the imminent end of the war, a few instances of cruelty by guards were reported even after this date. May 8th, 1865, Colonel Sweet received the order to release all prisoners except those above the rank of colonel. Those who took the oath of allegiance were provided transportation home, but those who did not were on their own. So you can get the hell out of here.
About 1,700.
Still, I wouldn't even have took the oath then. I'm still free. I'll get home. Shit.
All right. I figured it out. Figured it out.
Figured it out.
About 1,777. Whoa. About 1,770 prisoners refused to take the oath. And on July 5th, 1865, the guards were withdrawn from the camp.
Oh, that's it.
Only 16 prisoners then remain at the camp hospital. Sweet resigned from the Army on September 19th, 1865. And he was briefly replaced as commander of the camp by Captain Edward Shirley. About the 1st of October, 1865, Captain E.C. Fettiplace is appointed as the last commander of the camp. About 26,060 Confederate soldiers had passed through the Camp Douglas prison camp by the end of the war.
Jeez. After the war, the camp was decommissioned and the barracks and other buildings demolished. Structures that were then taken down by the end of November 1865. Property was sold off or returned to its owners during the late 1865, early 66. The official death toll for Confederate prisoners at Camp Douglas is given by several sources at 4,454.
Damn.
The worst period for mortality at the camp was 1865, when 867 prisoners when 867 prisoners died before the war ended, and the remaining prisoners were released, which were 2,000 in May and 4,000 in June. Released.
Wow.
Right. Okay.
Like we said before, 16 hospitalized men remained at the camp, according to Levy, or 30, according to Kelly, after July 5th, 1865. 1892, the United Confederate Veterans of Chicago appealed for funds to build a monument in Oakwood Cemetery, where almost all of the Confederate dead were reinterred from City Cemetery, and the cemetery for those who died from smallpox near Camp Douglas. In that document, the UCAV estimated that about 1,500 more unidentified Confederate dead were buried at Oakwoods. A lot of dead.
The document states that these bodies cannot be traced further except in numbers, thereby making the probable aggregate, as roundly stated, above 6,000. In the book compiling the speeches and material for the dedication of the monument in 1895, John Cox Underwood of the UCV stated he had identified 4,317 of those buried in the Confederate mound. That 412 more were identified by the U.S. government in the roster of those reinterred from the smallpox cemetery.
Jeez.
And that an estimated 1,500 more were on registers burned in the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, which makes for a total of 6,229 deaths.
Whoa.
In 1912, Josiah Seymour Curry, he wrote that there are 6,129 bodies of the Confederate soldiers lying in Oakwood Cemetery. Either or, $6,000 at least.
Jeez. More recently, in 2007, Kelly Pucci used the 6,000 figure for Camp Douglas deaths. In 2015, David Keller wrote that the total number of deaths at the Camp Douglas is somewhere between 4,243 names contained on the monument at the Confederate Mound at Oakwood Cemetery and the 7,000 reported by some historians. He wrote that the best estimates are between 5,000 and 6,000. Yes. He cited poor record keeping and the actions of those who handled the bodies for the lack of exact numbers. Keller also states that up to 50% of those who died before April 1863 were not even found until later, or never at all.
Not found later. No.
Because City Cemetery was close to Lake Michigan, many bodies allegedly swept out to sea.
Yeah, in the aftermath of the war, Camp Douglas, though not exclusively, it sometimes came to be described as the North Andersonville for its poor conditions and large number of deaths. Camp Douglas was one of the longest operating and largest prisons in the North. Although the number of prisoners who died there was more than at other locations, the percentage of prisoners who died at Douglas was similar to most of the other Union prison of war camps. Okay, that doesn't make it good.
No, the death rate of prisoners at Camp Douglas was lower than Andersonville, and the conditions at Camp Douglas were better.
Yeah, if you guys remember our Andersonville one, that was literally just a shithole, literally.
Wow. If any one camp could be called Andersonville to the north, it would more likely be Elmira Prison at Elmira, New York, where the deaths per 1,000 prisoners were 241 versus 44 at Camp Douglas.
Yeah, we'll get to Elmira.
Yeah, that was rough.
Today, condominiums fill most of the site where Camp Douglas stood. For many years, a local funeral home built on the site maintained prisoner records and a Confederate flag at half-staff in Illinois. Huh?
Wow.
The business closed December 31st, 2007. In 2012, archaeological work at the site was conducted, and since 2013 has continued on a biannual basis with help from college students from DePaul University, as well as other local volunteers and children from the neighborhood. Hey, children, go dig up these Confederate bones.
All right.
A group called Camp Douglas Restoration Foundation, formed in 2010, hopes to spur the development of a permanent museum on the site, and as of now, I don't think we've heard anything about it.
No, it'll never happen.
Crazy work. Well, not now, yeah, for sure. Crazy work there, Camp Douglas. Jeez.
Wow. Yeah, that was rough. Poor guys.
Oh, it sounded worse than Andersonville to me.
Yeah. If not worse, it was pretty close.
like we said in Andersonville, it wasn't just the Confederates treating these guys like shit. You saw even what they were doing to the own Union guys that were still waiting for transfer.
Right.
Treated them like shit, too. That's how
did.
fucked up people were back then.
Fucking crazy.
But, yep, that's us for Camp Douglas. We'll be back next week for more Behind the Battles. Likely another Union general of some sort. So join us then. Make sure to subscribe, comment, like, share, all that good stuff with your friends. And we'll be back next week for more Civil War Behind the Battles. We are the Mother Michiganders. We